Joined now by former Vancouver Canuck, TSN hockey analyst Frank Corrado. Frank, the NHL season's upon us. Happy opening night to you.
It's about time. That was the longest preseason I can ever remember, but we're here. We made it.
TDL.
Why was it the longest?
TDL.
Like it wasn't actually the longest in terms of games. Most teams have really shaved down. But like, were we this anxious to see Bedard? Were we like, why do you think it did feel long? Because I've heard that from a number of people, even though most teams have trimmed off a game or two.
June 24th potentially for Game 7 of the Stanley Cup.
Oh, it's outrageous. It's outrageous. I think it has a couple things to do with like there's just not many roster spots available because teams are so up against the cap.
That's a good point.
You see how many teams are carrying 20-man, 21-man rosters. They don't even have the full 23 available to them. So how much of a battle can there be for certain positions? So you lose that. And teams playing 8 games, right? You start seeing guys on the ice that are getting bonus games just for kind of showing up. And it's like, okay, you're getting a look at guys, but how much are we actually going to talk about that, right? And so I don't know. I feel like they can definitely shorten it, but I think Jerry likes the extra gate for all the teams. So I guess it's as is for now.
Jerry is Bettman in TSN 1050 parlance because of a character that Jeff O'Neill does on the show, a spoof, a satire, if you will, of the commissioner. It's quite funny. Quite enjoy it. Okay, so let's start with fastballs here. Your predictions for the Canucks this year. Where do you see them finishing in the division or conference? How many points roughly do you see them at?
All right, so we're getting right after it, eh? Like fastball. I had to do this exercise for SportsCenter the other day, and I was asked how many Canadian teams were going to make the playoffs and which Canadian teams they would be. So let's go process of elimination, okay, before I get to my answer. Toronto's making the playoffs. Edmonton's making the playoffs, barring anything crazy happening. I think Ottawa is a playoff team if they have Norris healthy for the majority of the season, and if Shane Pinto, who missed training camp, and that's, who knows what that looks like for him. But if he's playing, they have strength down the middle of the ice. I think they're a playoff team as well. I said there's 4 teams making the playoffs in Canada. So that means either I picked Winnipeg, Calgary, or Vancouver, okay, out of those 3. At the time when I did this exercise, Scheifele and Hellebuck were not signed yet. So my eyes went to Calgary, and I said, well, if Jacob Markstrom can stop the first shot of the game more often than not, if they can win 1-goal games, which they lost more than anyone last year, they have the easiest route to turn things around because they have a good decor, they have a good structure in place, although they're going to have a new coach, and if they can find a little more offense from guys who are very capable, I see that being a quick turnaround for them. So I said they were the most likely. So that means I had the Canucks on the outside looking in. I had the Jets on the outside looking in. I will stand by that today. I will say that I still believe the Canucks will miss the playoffs. I think they give it a valiant effort, but just something about the team and like some of the warts they may have defensively away from the puck. There's just something that screams 4 points out of a playoff spot when things are all said and done to me.
A few things. I'm with you because I was looking at about 94, 95 points for the Canucks, and then Soucy got hurt. Mikheyev wasn't going to be ready, and even Bluger, who's looked so darn good on the penalty kill, and I adjusted downwards. As for Markstrom, and incidentally, let the first shot in here Friday.
It's unbelievable. That continues. I can't believe it.
Do you have a theory there, Frank? Because we used to notice it here in Vancouver as well.
He did it all the time here.
I have no idea. Like my main takeaway from playing with Markstrom was whenever he had a bad game, you could bet that he was coming back with an unbelievable performance the next game. He was such a good bounce back guy. I never experienced the first shot of the game going in thing with him. It's weird though. And automatically you start thinking, okay, what's your pregame routine? He's as focused and as concentrated as anyone before the game, especially a goaltender. Guys, they're not overly social before the game. I will say he's probably the most normal goalie that I ever played with in my career. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. A lot of goalies are just doing their own thing. They don't look at you. They don't talk to you. He's a little more social that way, but I just think it's one of those coincidence things that happens. But I would imagine this year that certainly gets rectified. As far as the Canucks go, like in their like quest to make the playoffs, it just seems like, yeah, you mentioned Susie being hurt. If there's another blue line injury, like I just don't buy that there's enough depth. Like I feel like there's guys that are nice within the organization, but then you start putting them up against the NHL test and you're like, okay, I can see why, that guy's lower on the depth chart or playing in the American Hockey League. And, I know there's a lot of wingers there. Is there enough scoring on the wing? Like that's one of the questions for me, that it's a lot of the same kind of player on the wing. And Kuzmenko's going to have to shoot at a really high clip again. And we know like that's not easy to sustain. Like I know there's a lot of wingers, but I find they're all like jumbled into the same category of player. No one really distinguishes themselves for me.
The worry for me is that
5-on-5 scoring too.
I mean, they were 13th in scoring last year, and that was with not a lot of reins on them. My worry is the reins are going to be on them now, but then ultimately, as you've sort of outlined, they're still maybe not that pedigreed enough to be a good defensive team. So does does the scoring go down because you're so committed to the defense, and yet you're still not even that much better defensively that it sort of checks and balances? I worry about that.
Point. I actually think that's a great point. And one thing you kind of experience over the years, and I was probably one of these guys too, where, you get so focused and dialed in on the structure and playing away from the puck, and all that stuff is fine. And you need to do it. It's a prerequisite to play in the NHL. I find that the players, generally speaking, the players that are at the higher end of their category, they pick things up and execute things much better than just the average guy. And it sounds obvious, okay? Because it's like, yeah, the guy scores goals. He's a goal scorer. He does it better than anyone else. He's a playmaker. He does that better than anyone else. But they're like that mentally for a reason. They're wired different. They do things different on the ice, and they pick things up better. So when it comes to defensive play and structure, I will actually take those kinds of guys that maybe you think they're one-dimensional, but they're just better at things. Their brain processes things much better. Whereas, someone who's at the lower echelon or just the average kind of guy, it's like, I can process the structure. I can process being above the puck, all that kind of stuff. Something's going to fall behind. And generally speaking, it's like, a little offense can fall behind, or, their mistake will be a little bigger, a little more glowing, because maybe they don't have the foot speed, or they don't have, the body frame, or whatever the case may be. And I think that's a dangerous balance to have. And the Canucks might fall into that category at times.
So you're not all that worried about Hughes and Pettersson and maybe even Miller, the stars of the Vancouver Canucks picking this up. You'd be more worried about, you'd be more worried, even if it doesn't seem to suit a guy like JT Miller, or at least JT Miller as a centerman.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I think the guys that are really, really good at what they do, they're really good for a reason, because it's between the ears, and they can pick things up and kind of adapt and adjust better than the guy who's just an average guy, which, let's be honest. You look at the Canucks roster, outside of a handful of guys, there's a lot of replacement level. I know that term gets thrown around a lot, but there's a lot of replacement level guys. There's, one little thing that maybe separates them from someone else, but calling a spade, like there's a lot of that on the roster.
The Canucks are doing what many NHL teams, so I'm not going to say that they're alone in this, but this team over several administrations has been guilty of acquiring players and expecting them to be able to rise up the ranks of their slot, if you will. Asking a bunch of number 5 defensemen to act like 3s and 4s, that's a gamble, and it rarely pays off. Sometimes a player, that's how a player arrives, is they get that extra little bit of a responsibility and they respond wonderfully, and that does happen. But it seems like the Canucks are always yearly asking players to do this.
Yeah, or you think you caught lightning in a bottle because a guy had a career year last year, and you think, okay, well, he can do that again. Sometimes the track record would indicate like it's not going to be the case. And I'm all for giving players a chance, because you see it all the time where a guy kind of gets stuck in an organization where he's drafted, and maybe he clears waivers, whatever the case may be. And you're like, if we could get him to a spot where we put him in a position to succeed, we can bring that out in him. We'll give him the opportunity. We'll give him the ice time. and that's fine and dandy. But generally speaking, the teams that are doing that are not the best teams in the league. Like, they might add one guy because it fits what they're looking for, and they find them on the cheap, and they're really strapped up against the cap, and they don't have that player. They didn't have that player in their system. But to do it more than that, to do it with a handful of guys, I feel like you're giving a handful of guys an opportunity and hoping, hedging your bets that they're all going to take that step together. I feel like it's a dangerous game to play, because they're not all going to get there. Like, you can do it maybe with one guy. When there's too many guys, I think it's a little too difficult.
Tell us about Sam Lafferty and the player you saw in Toronto and previous stops.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Sam Lafferty is one of those guys, like, we use the term replacement level, but he does some things well that will fit in on the Canucks team. And the big thing that you'll notice is the foot speed. Like, he's fast, he scoots, he gets around the ice really well. He plays what I would describe like a busy kind of game. I don't think he's overly physical. I remember when he got to Toronto last year, he was talking about, in the media saying, when the game gets physical, I think that's when I really come to life. I'll be honest, I never noticed that in the games that he played. I don't think he exactly was proactive in looking for physicality, but he didn't exactly shy away from it either. Like, I just thought he was just like anyone. Like, if the game's physical, the game's physical. He's not going out looking for it. There's probably a little bit of scoring touch there, which I think separates him from the players within the Canucks organization that he may have exceeded here now getting into the lineup. Like, there's going to be a little bit of offensive pop there lower in the lineup. But listen, I will say this. If you're a team and you want to go out there and spend an asset to bring in a player that you think makes you a better team, I'm never going to talk bad about it as long as it makes some sense. In this regard, I think it does make some sense, because we know the path that the Canucks are committed to. They're committed to trying to make the playoffs, and they're going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. I think Lafferty, I heard there were other teams interested in him, like Edmonton was interested. So you go out, you get him for a 5th round pick. I would say he's better than who they've sent to the minors. But I'm not sitting there expecting, Lafferty to turn into a 20-goal guy and run teams out of the building. He's going to skate pretty fast. You're going to see him buzzing around the ice. He'll do pretty well on the penalty kill, but I don't think you're going to leave the rink many nights thinking, man, Lafferty was on fire tonight.
This sounds like poor man's Yannick Hansen. Is that barking up the right tree?
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good comparable, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I would say Yannick had more scoring touch and more playing ability for sure. Like, we also, like, I had this conversation with someone in Toronto the other day, and we were talking about contracts, right? And how much you make and how much that correlates to your output, right? And how much production you have. I'm like, Sam Lafferty's cap hit is 1.15. That's exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get a $1.15 million player at best. And I think that's okay for the Canucks.
If and there are conflicting reports here, but one report suggests that Connor Garland asked for a trade in the summer. Vancouver Canucks weren't able to get it done. He has now switched agents. That agent has been empowered to go look for a trade for Connor Garland. But all this breaks on the eve of the season, Frankie. What's the dynamic like in the room with Connor Garland with all this breaking in the hours before opening night?
I feel bad for the guy. Like, I feel bad for Connor Garland, because he's got to go into the dressing room now. And it's, generally speaking, the first game of the season, there's a lot of optimism. There's a lot of positivity of what could be. There's guys getting their first opportunities in the NHL. There's guys looking to take a step here. There's star players that want to establish, their role as leaders on the team. And for him, he's caught somewhere in the middle there, where, of course, he wants to play well. Of course, he wants the Canucks to win. But when news like this goes public, that your agent has been given permission to look around the league and ask for a trade, you're almost like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So you don't feel like you're a part of the bigger thing here, which is the team trying to make the playoffs. So I feel for him in that regard. I will say this, like, I see it a lot, whether it was guys I played with or guys I've played against, guys I came up with, where they have an agent and things go a certain way. Then they get a new agent and then they're going to go down the same path. They're going to try doing the same things, whether it's looking for a trade or getting a contract, all that kind of stuff. The answers are still the same from all the general men. It's not like a new agent is going to miraculously get all the money off the books and not have to throw in a sweetener and all these kinds of things. It's like, I don't know, sometimes the grass isn't always greener. Like I know a guy who fired his agent he was with for a long time, went to another agent, ended up getting a one-way deal. Okay. That one-way deal was probably going to be there for him regardless. The next year, he's looking at a PTO. There was nothing there for him. And I'm like, good thing you fired your agent that you had for 12 years to go to this guy. He didn't get you anything either. Like sometimes the product on the ice, that's what dictates the market for you, whether you get traded or whether you sign a contract. Like we can't hide from that. So listen, I feel for him. I think he's in a tough spot with everything going on here. And for his sake, it's probably better if he does move on and they can find a new home for him.
J-Pat says
yes.
J-Pat says it all the time with regards to, media blaming. We work with the material provided by the club. Agents work with the material provided by the client. And if the client doesn't get better, guess what? The agent is probably...
J-Pat had a great tweet too. He said, you're changing agents? That agent got you $5 million per season. Are you sure you want to change that agent?
It's a great point by him.
I mean, it started as just sort of some spitballing from Canucks Army saying, hey, look at all the righties on Columbus. Frank Saravelli says there actually is some interest from Columbus to jettison somebody in there. I'm putting you on the spot here. Do you have a decent scouting report on Boqvist or Peak in particular, who seem to be the names most mentioned?
Why not Goodbranson, Blake? Is Eric Goodbranson not coming back here with 3 years left on his deal?
That ship has sailed?
Yeah.
Although good for Eric Goodbranson. He got paid on his last contract.
Did he ever?
Actually, like I know we talked about that in the summer, but big, rugged defensemen are at a premium right now. Look at Gudis, look at Luke Shen. So we can laugh all we want, but that guy is making a boatload of money. If I'm Columbus, I need a centerman because I want nothing to do with Patrick Laine playing center for a whole season. Right. Good player. He's just not I can't trust that guy as a centerman if you want your team to compete for a playoff spot and have some responsibility. As far as both those guys, Peak and Boqvist, I've seen them a little bit, just following Toronto and, they play Columbus a decent amount. Boqvist is a nice player. He's a puck mover. He's not going to be overly physical, but man, he can skate the puck up the ice really well. I think he's one of those guys that joins the rush, not afraid to get involved that way. I like him. I think Rasmus Sandin really wanted to get the same contract as him. And I think Sandin was probably like, I've been more productive. I've been a better player, but this guy got a nice ticket. So I would look at Boqvist in the same light that you would look at a player like Rasmus Sandin if you've seen him play.
Sure,
like pretty good with the puck, skilled, smooth guy. Obviously not going to run you out of the building, but very competent as far as his play with the puck in the defensive zone, through the neutral zone, and of course getting into the offensive zone. Peak is one of those guys where he's like a jack of all, but a master of none, if that makes sense. He's going to do everything pretty well for you. You can probably trust him in a few more situations, a little more responsible, but I don't think the puck moving ability lacks behind either. But there's no one thing, from watching Columbus the few times that I do a season, there's no real one thing that really sticks out and makes you say, oh, okay, he's got that Goodbranson, rugged, big body. He's not exactly the kind of puck mover that Boqvist is, but he does a lot of things pretty well, and he's done well for himself.
And he's only 25, so maybe there's some improvement left there.
Yeah.
Yep. Marvelous stuff, Frank. Thank you for this. We'll catch up next Wednesday.
See you guys.
This Sekeres and Price clip brought to you by
Jason Mortgage.